The morning in Maplewood, a small town in North Carolina, was peaceful. Melissa Wilson took a sip of coffee before putting on her pharmacy coat, squinting at the autumn foliage visible through the window in her backyard. The golden fall sunlight gently touched her brown hair. "Caitlin, breakfast is ready," Melissa called toward the stairs. "You'll be late." Footsteps could be heard from upstairs, and 16-year-old Caitlin came running down. Her long blonde hair was neatly styled despite the morning rush, and her uniform blazer was perfectly ironed. "Morning, Mom," Caitlin kissed her mother's cheek and reached for the toast and orange juice on the table. "Has Dad already left?" Melissa hesitated for a moment, then smiled lightly. "Yes, he said he had an early meeting. He seemed to have worked late last night, so I let him rest this morning." Caitlin didn't say anything, but her blue eyes reflected doubt. She had recently begun to notice the tension between her parents. Melissa didn't miss her daughter's expression. She came closer and placed a hand on Caitlin's shoulder. "It's all right. Dad's just busy. His new project is demanding." "Mom, I'm not stupid," Caitlin said quietly. "I know Dad's been acting strange lately. He comes home late and hardly talks to us." Melissa took a deep breath. She didn't want to worry her daughter, but Caitlin was no longer a child and was keenly aware of the changing atmosphere at home. Greg had once been a husband and father who cherished his family. Despite his busy days as an executive at a construction company, he always made time for family on weekends and never missed cheering at Caitlin's soccer games. But everything had changed in the last few months. Greg's homecoming times grew later, and he increasingly stayed out late citing work engagements. Melissa could sense another man's shadow lurking behind him. "Let's all have dinner together tonight," Melissa tried to sound cheerful, but her voice trembled slightly. "I'll make Dad's favorite lasagna." Caitlin gave her mother a small smile at the effort, but her eyes were clouded with sadness. "Okay, Mom. I'll come home early after my after-school club." Melissa drove her daughter to school, then headed to Healthy Life Pharmacy in the town center. This pharmacy, where she had worked for 15 years, was like a sanctuary for her. Here, she was a respected professional with an important role in protecting the community's health. Today would be another busy day. That was a good thing. When immersed in work, she had less time to think about her home problems. "Morning, Melissa," her colleague Betty greeted her cheerfully. However, she quickly noticed Melissa's tired expression and frowned with concern. "Couldn't sleep again?" Betty had been Melissa's best friend for 20 years, since their nursing school days. She worked at the pharmacy reception and knew all about Melissa's domestic issues. "Yes, a bit," Melissa answered while putting on her white coat. "Greg was late again last night. He came home at 3 a.m. smelling of alcohol." Betty made sure no one was around before lowering her voice. "Melissa, you really should confront him. You can't keep going like this." Melissa shrugged slightly while organizing prescriptions. "I'm afraid," she admitted her true feelings for the first time. "If he's with someone else." Her words caught in her throat. "You're a strong woman, Mel," Betty looked at her friend with serious eyes. "Whatever the truth is, it's better than this uncertainty. For your sake and Caitlin's, you need to know the truth." Melissa took a deep breath and made up her mind. Tonight, when Greg came home, she would have a serious talk with him. She had the right to know if their 15-year marriage was really coming to an end, or if there was some other issue. The day at the pharmacy passed quickly, and Melissa finished work at 5 p.m., stopping by the supermarket to buy ingredients for lasagna. On her way home, she called her husband. "Greg, what time will you be home tonight?" She tried to sound cheerful. Not sure," Greg's voice sounded distant, with men's voices audible in the background. "I have a meeting with an important client. Might be late." Melissa couldn't hide her disappointment. "Please, Greg. For Caitlin's sake. We haven't eaten as a family lately. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone, and finally Greg answered. I'll try, but I can't promise. After hanging up, Melissa gripped the steering wheel tightly. She felt something breaking irreparably inside her. Just then, her cell phone rang, displaying an unknown number. Answering, she heard a young woman's voice. This is St. Mary's Hospital. Your daughter, Caitlin Wilson, has been in a traffic accident. Could you come right away? Deciding she wasn't in a state to drive, Melissa called Betty. Her voice shook, and she could barely form words. But Betty understood the situation and said, I'll come get you right away, don't move. 10 minutes later, Betty's car slid to a stop in front of Melissa's house. Melissa was already waiting at the doorstep, her face pale and her eyes filled with fear. Caitlin is. She could barely squeeze out the words. It's okay, Mel. Betty grabbed her shoulders, trying to calm her. We're going to the hospital now. Take a deep breath. On the way to St. Mary's Hospital, Melissa called Greg's cell phone several times, but got no answer. He's not picking up, she clutched her phone with trembling hands. My daughter's been in an accident, and he won't answer his phone. Arriving at the hospital, a nurse from the emergency department was waiting for her. Mrs. Wilson, this way please, she guided Melissa with an efficient but compassionate manner. Your daughter is currently undergoing diagnostic tests. The doctor will speak with you shortly. Though told to sit in the waiting room, Melissa couldn't stay seated. She paced back and forth, looking out the window and repeatedly calling Greg. On the 6th attempt, her husband finally answered. Melissa. Greg's voice sounded somewhat irritated. I'm in a meeting. Greg, listen. Melissa practically shouted. Caitlin's been in an accident. I'm at St. Mary's Hospital now. She's in critical condition. There was a moment of silence on the other end, and then came words she would never forget. I can't come right now. Greg's voice was cold and indifferent, with music and laughter audible in the background. I'm in the middle of an important party. I'll come later. A party? Melissa said in disbelief. Greg, do you understand? Caitlin, your daughter, has been in an accident and needs surgery now. I got it. Greg's voice showed no sign of panic. But I just can't get away right now. I'll be there in 2 hours. 2 hours. Melissa's voice shook with despair and anger. Are you insane? But there was no reply. Greg had already hung up. Melissa nearly collapsed, sinking into a nearby chair. Her hands were shaking, and tears streamed down her face. Betty put an arm around her for support. He's not coming, Melissa said in a trembling voice. Says he can't because he has a party. Anger flashed in Betty's eyes. What is that man thinking? At that moment, a doctor in a white coat approached them. Mrs. Wilson, he looked at Melissa with a calm but serious expression. I'm Dr. Martin Reed, your daughter's attending physician. Melissa stood up, desperately clinging to the doctor's words. Caitlin. How is she? Your daughter has suffered multiple injuries, Dr. Martin explained calmly but compassionately. A broken left arm, fractured ribs, and most concerningly, head trauma. The CT scan shows signs of intracranial bleeding. She needs immediate surgery. Melissa turned pale. Will she survive? It was the only question she could ask. Dr. Martin looked straight into her eyes. We'll do our best. Your daughter is young and healthy. That's in her favor. But honestly, the situation is serious. You need to sign the consent form for surgery. A nurse brought the paperwork. Your husband. He can't come, Melissa said. As she spoke those words, something broke definitively inside her. I'll sign it. While signing the consent form, Melissa vowed she would never forget this moment. When her daughter's life was in danger, her husband chose a party. The truth about her marriage had never been clearer. "The operating room is ready," the nurse announced. "Would you like to see your daughter before surgery?" Melissa nodded and, with Betty's support, headed to the treatment room. There she saw her daughter surrounded by tubes and machines, her bloodied blonde hair stuck to her forehead. Caitlin's face was swollen with bruises, and her left arm was in a temporary cast. She was unconscious, breathing shallowly. "My baby." Melissa took her daughter's hand and kissed it with trembling lips. "Mommy's here. You're strong, so hang in there. Please." As the nurses began to move Caitlin to the operating room, Melissa had to let go of her daughter's hand. In that moment, all her emotions overflowed: anger, fear, sadness, and determination. "How long will it take?" she asked the doctor. "At least 4 hours," Dr. Martin answered. "We'll do everything possible. I promise." As the operating room doors closed, Melissa and Betty returned to the waiting room. Melissa sat on a bench and covered her face with her hands. "I will never forgive him," she said quietly. "Never." Betty embraced her friend's shoulders. "Let's just think about Caitlin now. She's a strong girl. She'll pull through." 2 hours after surgery began, Melissa called Tom Jenkins, an attorney. He was a longtime family friend and someone Melissa trusted. "Tom, I want a divorce," she said in a shaking voice. "Can we meet as soon as possible?" "Of course, Melissa." Tom sounded surprised but quickly returned to his professional tone. "How about tomorrow afternoon?" "Thank you." She hung up and took a deep breath. 4.5 hours later, Dr. Martin appeared in the waiting room in his surgical attire. He looked tired but had a small smile. "The surgery was successful," he said. "We stopped the bleeding and relieved the pressure. The next 24 hours are crucial. We're not out of the woods yet, but your daughter has fighting spirit." Melissa broke down in tears of relief. "Thank you, doctor. Truly. You can stay with your daughter in the ICU," Dr. Martin said. "I should tell you to get some rest, but I know that's impossible," he smiled kindly. Melissa urged Betty to go home, while she settled into a chair at Caitlin's bedside. Holding her daughter's hand, she prayed. Melissa spent the night in the hospital ICU, barely sleeping at all. She gazed at her daughter's face, occasionally squeezing her thin hand. Caitlin's face was pale, and her breathing continued regularly with the help of machines. A white bandage was wrapped around her head, and the sound of monitors echoed in the quiet room. Around 8 a.m., Dr. Martin arrived for his rounds. "You've been here all night," he said gently. "Did you get any rest?" Melissa shook her head. "I couldn't sleep. But I'm fine." Dr. Martin checked Caitlin's vital signs and wrote something in her chart. "Her condition is stable." "That's a good sign. The intracranial pressure is decreasing." "Will she wake up?" Melissa's voice trembled with anxiety. "It may take time, but I'm optimistic," Dr. Martin answered sincerely. "Youth and health are powerful allies. Let's give it a little more time and see." "Your husband?" he asked cautiously. Anger flashed in Melissa's eyes. "He hasn't come. I can't reach him." Dr. Martin said nothing, but understanding showed in his eyes. "You should get something to eat. The cafeteria on the first floor isn't bad. Why don't you go while I'm here?" Melissa hesitated but, feeling hungry and tired, nodded. "Just 15 minutes." In the cafeteria, she bought coffee and a sandwich and sat by a window. Outside it was a sunny day, with tree leaves swaying in the breeze. People passed by the hospital, going about their normal day. But Melissa's world had been turned upside down. After eating half her sandwich, her smartphone rang. It was Betty. Mel, how are things? Any change? Her condition is stable, Melissa answered. The doctor is optimistic. But she hasn't regained consciousness yet. Greg? No contact, Melissa's voice was cold. I don't even want to think about him anymore. I took the day off, so I'll be there soon, Betty said. I can't leave you alone. Melissa expressed her thanks and hung up. As she was finishing her coffee, sirens echoed through the hospital. A new emergency patient had arrived. This wasn't unusual at this hospital. She returned her tray and headed for the elevator to return to the 5th floor where the ICU was located. When the elevator doors opened, the hallway was somewhat more crowded than usual. Nurses and medical staff were busy coming and going, and loud voices could be heard from somewhere. As Melissa walked toward Caitlin's room, she saw medical staff bringing a patient out of the treatment room. She unconsciously stepped aside to wait for them to pass. That's when she froze. Lying on the stretcher with a bloodied face was none other than Greg Wilson. Greg, she cried out involuntarily. The man on the stretcher opened his eyes. Greg's face was swollen with bruises, and blood flowed from his forehead. When his eyes caught Melissa's, confusion and shame appeared there. Melissa. His voice was hoarse. The medical staff continued carrying him without stopping. I'm sorry, but we need to examine him immediately, a young doctor said. Melissa stood stunned with confusion and shock. Greg is here. Why? Is that man your husband? One of the nurses came back and asked. Yes, Melissa finally answered. What happened? A traffic accident, the nurse said matter-of-factly. According to police, there's suspicion of drunk driving. Melissa was speechless. She couldn't understand what was happening. She slowly returned to Caitlin's room. There was no change in her daughter's condition. About an hour later, footsteps were heard in the hallway, and Dr. Martin stopped. Mrs. Wilson, could we talk for a moment? His voice was more tense than usual. Melissa whispered, I'll be right back, to her daughter and stepped into the hallway. 2 police officers in uniform were standing a short distance away. Dr. Martin led Melissa to a quiet place, looked around, and began speaking in a low voice. Mrs. Wilson, your husband's arrival is not a coincidence. Melissa frowned. What do you mean? The doctor took a deep breath. According to police information, your husband's car was spotted near the scene where your daughter had the accident yesterday. Surveillance camera footage has been confirmed. Melissa was speechless and leaned against the wall. What? What are you saying? Ma'am, was your daughter's accident really an accident? The police are now investigating it as a hit and run. And, it's been confirmed that your husband was with another woman last night. Melissa's legs wobbled, and the doctor supported her. Let's sit down, he guided Melissa to a nearby chair. I can't believe it. Melissa finally spoke. Greg? To Caitlin. The police are investigating everything, Dr. Martin said quietly. It seems your husband wasn't driving himself. However, the police believe there's a high probability that he was at the scene, or nearby, at the time of the accident. One of the police officers approached. Mrs. Wilson, may I speak with you? Melissa vaguely nodded. The officer sat down in front of Melissa and opened his notebook. I'm Detective Johnson, he introduced himself calmly. I'm sorry to bother you at such a difficult time. May I ask you a few questions? Melissa felt like she was in a nightmare, but she began answering the officer's questions. Detective Johnson proceeded carefully. Where did your husband say he was yesterday evening? He said he had work, a meeting with a client, Melissa answered. But when I called him, I could hear music and laughter in the background. It sounded like a party. Has there been any change in his behavior recently? Yes, Melissa gave a bitter smile. He's been spending less time at home, coming home late citing work. And he's been smelling of alcohol more often. The police officer nodded quietly while taking notes. Have you ever heard of a woman named Diana Morris, who is close to your husband? Melissa lost color in her face. No. Who is she? She's an accountant who has been working at your husband's company for about 3 months. She's 27 years old, the officer simply stated the facts. She is currently on the run and being sought. What? Melissa was confused. What do you mean? According to testimony, your husband and Ms. Morris were having a heated argument last night. They got into a car, with Morris driving, and left. About an hour later, that car was involved in an accident at another location. Your husband was thrown from the vehicle, and Morris fled the scene. Melissa held her head. This is insanity. The police officer looked at her with sympathetic eyes. Our assessment is that your daughter was the victim of a hit and run, and the suspect in that hit and run is Diana Morris. And, he continued, choosing his words carefully, we are investigating the possibility that your husband knew this fact and helped her escape. Tears welled up in Melissa's eyes. Anger and sadness mingled, and her body trembled. My daughter, and my husband. I can't believe it. Dr. Martin placed a hand on Melissa's shoulder. If there's anything I can help with, just say the word. Melissa wiped her eyes with a handkerchief and steeled her resolve. I'm here for my daughter. As for my husband, he no longer matters. Her words carried a coldness and determination she had never shown before. She knew she had crossed a point of no return. As she returned to her daughter's bedside, Melissa thought, when this nightmare is over, we'll start a new life. The hospital chapel was quiet. The afternoon light streaming through the stained glass windows gave the space a mystical atmosphere. Melissa sat alone in the front row on a wooden bench, neither praying nor just staring ahead. Her heart was filled with confusion and anger, but her expression was strangely calm. Mel. Betty's voice broke the silence. As Melissa turned around, her friend stood there with a worried expression. Betty immediately sat down beside her and silently put an arm around her. The two didn't exchange words for a while. I heard everything from the police, Betty finally said quietly. I can't believe it. Melissa slowly raised her face. There were no tears in her eyes, only deep sadness and fatigue. Betty, what did I miss? I lived with that man for 15 years and never knew the real him. This isn't your fault, Betty said firmly. Caitlin has woken up, Melissa suddenly changed the subject. She can barely talk yet, but she responded when I called her. The doctor says it's a good sign. That's wonderful news. But, Melissa's voice trembled, she doesn't know the details of the accident yet. What her father? She choked on her words and took a deep breath. Betty silently squeezed her friend's hand. At that moment, footsteps could be heard from the hallway, and attorney Tom Jenkins entered. Melissa, he greeted her quietly. Do you have time to talk? Melissa nodded and stood up. Betty, could you stay with Caitlin for a bit? The three met in the hospital cafeteria. Sitting at a corner table with few people around, Tom opened his briefcase full of documents. First, considering your emotional state, you don't have to proceed with legal matters right away, he said gently. You have the right to take time to think. No, Tom, Melissa's voice was resolute. I want to proceed right away. I don't want to remain legally bound to that man for a single day longer. Tom nodded and took out some papers. According to information from the police, the situation has become even more complicated. What do you mean? Your husband and Diana Morris weren't just having an affair, Tom explained quietly. There's evidence they were embezzling company funds. A substantial amount. And apparently, they were planning to flee to Las Vegas. Melissa was stunned. Embezzlement? Yes. The police have obtained a warrant to search his office and home. When they searched your home, they found fake passports and bundles of cash in his study. But why? Caitlin. Melissa couldn't voice her most terrifying question. Tom continued with a grave expression. The police hypothesis is that Caitlin may have accidentally found documents showing her father's misconduct. Or, she might have noticed something. Melissa gasped. Caitlin's room, there were documents from her father's company on her desk. I saw them last Friday when I was cleaning, but I didn't question why they were there. According to testimony from Greg's colleague, he told Diana that his daughter was becoming a problem, Tom relayed, choosing his words carefully. And on the day of the accident, they knew the time and route Caitlin would take home from school. You don't mean? The color drained from Melissa's face. It was planned. The police now believe that Diana hit Caitlin in the hit and run, and Greg helped her escape as an accomplice. Afterward, they argued while intoxicated, and the two drove off. Diana lost control of the car, and Greg was thrown out. Melissa couldn't think straight. This was beyond a nightmare. Her husband hadn't just been unfaithful, he had embezzled funds and, worst of all, may have been involved in a hit and run to silence his own daughter. Is Diana still on the run? Tom answered. But her photo has been distributed to all checkpoints at state borders. She won't get far. Melissa suddenly stood up and walked to the window. Her back was tense, and her shoulders were trembling. When I married Greg, he was a different person, she finally squeezed out. Kind, honest, at least that's how he seemed to me. What turned him into such a monster? There was no answer to the question. She returned to her seat and began reviewing the divorce papers. We have everything we need. The house is in my name, and we kept our savings separate. Custody of Caitlin. She gave a bitter smile. I don't think that will be contested. Just then, Melissa's smartphone rang. It was the hospital. Yes, this is Wilson, she answered. Dr. Martin's voice could be heard. Mrs. Wilson, your daughter is responding more clearly now. Could you come as soon as possible? I'll be right there, Melissa replied and hung up. Her expression brightened. Caitlin seems to be getting better. At that moment, another nurse approached their table. Mrs. Wilson. Police officers are here. They say they have important news. Back on the ICU floor, Detective Johnson was waiting. His expression was bright, showing relief. Mrs. Wilson, Diana Morris has been arrested at the state border, he reported. She surrendered without resistance and has already begun making a statement. Melissa nodded. Thank you, Detective. I'll contact you as soon as we have more details, the detective said. I'm praying for your daughter's recovery. Melissa headed to Caitlin's room. Seeing her daughter, her heart filled with love. The swelling on Caitlin's face had subsided slightly, and her breathing was stable. When Melissa took her hand, Caitlin slowly opened her eyes. Mom. That voice was faint, but to Melissa, it sounded like an angel's song. Yes, I'm here, Kate, Melissa gently kissed her daughter's hand. I'll always be here. Caitlin closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. Dad. Melissa hesitated for a moment. She wasn't ready to tell her daughter the truth. She couldn't burden her still recovering daughter with her father's betrayal. Dad won't be able to see us for a while, she said gently. But don't worry. We'll be okay. Relief showed in Caitlin's eyes, and she fell asleep again. Melissa kissed her daughter's forehead gently and looked out the window. A new day was beginning there. Warm spring sunlight drew long bands on the living room floor. Melissa was by the window, watering potted herbs while watching Caitlin lost in thought in the backyard. 6 months had passed since the accident, and their lives were slowly but surely taking a new shape. Caitlin had been discharged 2 months ago after a long rehabilitation and was recovering well. She still occasionally suffered from headaches, but doctors were confident about her complete recovery. Her left arm fracture had healed completely, and she was gradually returning to school life. "Mom," Caitlin came in from the backyard. Her complexion was good, with the healthy glow she had before returning. "What time is Dr. Martin coming?" Melissa looked at the clock. 7 o'clock. "We still have an hour." Dr. Martin Reed had changed from Caitlin's attending physician to Melissa's friend, and recently to someone even more special in her life. His kindness and sincerity had become healing for Melissa and Caitlin's wounded hearts. "Did the news say anything about Dad's trial today?" Caitlin asked quietly. She had learned the truth about her father a few weeks ago. Seeing her daughter's recovery, Melissa judged there was no longer a need to hide the truth. "Yes," Melissa took a deep breath. "The verdict is in." Caitlin silently waited for her mother's words. Dad received a 15-year prison sentence for embezzlement and aiding in the hit-and-run accident. Deanna got 18 years. Caitlin stared out the window for a while. "I see," she said simply. There was no anger or sadness in her voice, just a quiet acceptance. During the trial, they had not attended court. Melissa didn't want Caitlin to be present. But now, everything was over, and they could truly move forward. "More letters have come from Dad," Melissa pointed to a small wooden box on the bookshelf. There, letters Greg had sent from prison were stored, unopened. Caitlin stared at the box, then looked at her mother. "Do you ever plan to read them?" Melissa nodded. "When I think you're ready. If you don't want to read them, I understand that too." Caitlin sat in a chair, hugging her knees. "It's strange. I know Dad betrayed us, but sometimes I still remember the old Dad, the one who took me to soccer practice. Was all that a lie too?" Melissa sat next to her daughter and put an arm around her shoulders. "People are complex, Kate. I think he did love us once. But people change. Sometimes they give in to temptation and choose the wrong path." The two sat in silence for a while. Eventually, Caitlin said, "I want to read Dad's letters." Though surprised, Melissa took the box, pulled out the first envelope, and they began reading it together. It contained words from Greg acknowledging his crimes and expressing deep regret. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He probably knew he had no right to ask for that. There was only a wish that they know the truth. After reading, Melissa told Caitlin, "A real family isn't about blood ties, but about people who cherish and protect each other no matter what. Your father made grave mistakes, but he's still your father. However, we have no obligation to forgive his mistakes. We just have the right to move our lives forward." Caitlin squeezed her mother's hand. "Mom, we're going to be okay, right?" "Yes, of course," Melissa gently kissed her daughter's hair. "We have each other." The doorbell rang, announcing Martin's arrival. Melissa and Caitlin stood up, holding hands. Outside the window, the gentle light of dusk spread, seemingly carrying the promise of a new tomorrow.